different ages and stages in their learning, all with a common goal of getting ServSafe certified. I'd like to welcome you to this panel discussion with three very incredible educators here. Here we have Wayne Worthy from Redland Middle School, a middle school teacher who's been teaching for 25 years in culinary arts. Joe Kalfas, who's at the East Valley Institute of Technology here in Mesa, Arizona, who's been teaching for 20 years. And Joey Buddendorf, sorry.
That's okay. It's okay, Di.
Yeah, New England Culinary Institute from Montpelier, Vermont, and she's been teaching for 21 years, and also as part of Community Kitchen Academy. So with this discussion, we're going to be talking about the essential topic of how do you get students ServSafe Manager certified with relative ease. Well, it's never easy, but we try to do things to make our lives easier and the students' lives easier. So to kick off the session, we're going to have Wayne talk about what he does with his students.
Okay. Well, I'm a middle school teacher, and this is a program that we've incorporated about 7 years ago, started offering the ServSafe curriculum.
Wow.
I only offer it to the 8th graders as part of a magnet program between agriculture and culinary arts. And the students absolutely must pass the test. If they don't, our school gets hurt, our school grade gets hurt. So it's all about getting the kids to pass. So
Wayne,
with that being said, there's a few things we do to try to make that happen.
Yeah, Wayne, and when I first found out that you did ServSafe at the middle school level, I was floored because realistically, I've never heard of such a thing. I mean, this is like high school senior level stuff that you consider. So how do you do it, Wayne? How do you get these 8th graders ServSafe for Manager certified?
Okay, well, it is a draw. It does draw them to our school and to the magnet program. The state of Florida does have a labor law that does allow a child at the age of 14 to work. So if they're going to leave 8th grade as a 14-year-old and they're a rising 9th grader, they can work in the summertime. They can work during the breaks. They can work weekends during the school year even. And Miami is kind of one of the culinary capitals in the country. So it's an opportunity here.
Wonderful. Let's get into what you do to get them ready for the certification.
Okay. Well, as we all know, the book has about 10 chapters. Most of the recent editions have 10 chapters. Every chapter in the book, I try to give the students some type of project that they can take ownership of, where they have a little bit of self-direction and where they want to go. So here's an example of chapter 2. They created a chart of the big 6, something that can be laminated, and they can take it in the car with them. When they're waiting at the doctor office or for their parents, they've got a laminated card they can study from.
Yeah.
This is another project from temperatures. This would be coming from chapters 5 and 6. And again, they could laminate the backside of their big 6 chart. So each student, goes through the book and reads the material where there's a temperature involved, and then they create a chart that can help them study and retain the material. Another project might deal with vocabulary. There's a lot of vocabulary words in that curriculum that's can be complicated for the middle school students. So there's no shortage of online free programs on the internet that will allow students to create a crossword puzzle. So they like to create these puzzles and then they share them. Everybody creates a different puzzle and then they share them with each other and they score them. They really enjoy that. And of course, PowerPoints. This comes from chapter 4, the thermometers. There's a lot of different thermometers and gadgets in chapter 4. So one activity is to create a PowerPoint, share it with the class.
And these are things that the students do themselves to create ownership, right?
Absolutely. They're self-directed, and the final product is their project. But they truly enjoy sharing them with the other students.
Awesome. So once this is all said and done, then let's get into your evaluation of them.
Okay, so we definitely enjoy using the KP Compass program. We use it every year, and I found that this particular program is like an added bonus to having the textbook, because there's a lot of things that the students can do in this program when I'm not physically present with them right there at that moment. They can read this material, they can take these assessments, and as you look at this chart, you'll notice there's a lot of blue boxes. Those are assessments. Those are chapter assessments or review assessments. The final 6, for example, are reviews for the entire book. And I can kind of track their progress. what I like about these assessments, I can also see the missed question. So one of my great study strategies is when we go back and look at reviewing, we'll go and find a test where the student scored low. We'll look at all the incorrect answers, we'll poll them, and then we'll specifically study those answers, requiring the students to search the textbook, find the page reference, etc. When you see the yellows, that means the student is lacking in the reading comprehension. There's something they're missing. So when they're reading this material inside the KP program, they're getting questions incorrect. And when you see green, that means I've got them correct. So prior to selecting an exam group, I have to state how many are going to test and when. I'll look at this KP program. This is my first tool. And I can pull from here, maybe I'm looking at this chart right here. I could probably pull 13 kids just looking at this data right here that have a chance to pass the test.
And this is important because you don't want the students to go and fail it, right?
No, like I said before,
gray boxes,
and I was not exaggerating. They absolutely must pass. The principal tells me right to my face, he says, listen, you pick the kids, let's look over the data, but every kid must pass this test. And there's a lot riding on, a lot at stake.
That's great. So the data-driven decision. But what you're saying here is this is during the 2020 school year. So this is a pandemic year. So you have a few kids who kind of fell away, right?
Yes, thanks for pointing that out. Some of those gray boxes, we're in a pandemic year. Those students just kind of disappeared. They're not present. A lot of them, we don't know where they're at. Some of them have left the country. Some of them log on from places like Cuba and Mexico, but very infrequently. So it's unfortunate, it's kind of embarrassing, but it's the reality that we all face.
Okay, so now that you weeded them out and selected your group, let's look at how you did this year.
Yes, so we can't just look at only that data. It also, I found this test is very heavily correlated to reading level, reading ability. Yeah. So if you look at column B, that pretty much is the score on the prior slide of their performance on those assessments and comprehension. The column C is, did the student actually complete the program? Did they do all the reading activities? Did they take all the assessments? Did they participate? That's just the value I throw in there, a snapshot. And then we look at their reading scores from the prior state test, which is a real significant indicator. The only problem was because we didn't test last year in COVID, we're 2 years old on our data, but a level 5 is a maximum reading score. If you look, the students in column D that had a level 5 or a level 4 on their state assessment 2 years ago passed the test on the first try, which is column F. And we usually see that if they can read well and they're completing those KP Compass programs, they're going to pass the exam. I have no questions about a 4 or 5. It's when you get to level 2s and the 3s, you'll see some there. For example, lines 9 and 10. Line 9 did not pass on the first try. Level 2 reader passed on the second try with an 80. However, level 2 reader on line 10 did pass on the first try with a 78. So,
right.
That reading score at that age level is very important.
Yeah, 8th graders, you don't expect that level of comprehension, but somehow you did it. Let's talk about this outlier here, number 11.
Yeah, outlier number 11 is an ESOL student, came from Venezuela, spoke no English 2 years ago. So yeah, her reading score says level 1, but she's not. She's since graduated out of ESOL. If she was to take a state assessment now, she'd probably be a level 4, I would guess. So I tested her. I took a risk. I tested her. You can see her KP scores are pretty good. And she passed on the first try. And that was one of our success stories in our entire school this whole year.
That's wonderful. Applause for that. No English to be able to pass ServSafe Managers. That's quite an accomplishment. Yeah. All right. Well, that's great, Wayne. Thanks for sharing your techniques and your data-driven decisions. So, we're in a data-driven world. So the more data points you have to make the right decisions, the best it is for you, your students, and not to mention money. All right. So let's move on to Joe. He's in a different environment here. Thank you, Joe. You're up.
Well, thank you, Nye and everybody else. It's nice to be a part of this. Here at the East Valley Institute of Technology, we're a career and technical education district, a CTED. And so we're actually fed by 11 school districts here in the East Valley of metropolitan Phoenix. We have almost 60 high schools that feed us. And if you have any clue of the geo and socioeconomic indicators of Phoenix, we go as far as the Northeast Valley, which would be Cave Creek, Scottsdale, Fountain Hills, which has tends to be very affluent mostly. And then we go as far south and southeast as Santan Valley, right up against the Gila River Indian community. So we have each end of the spectrum as far as socioeconomic, as well as everything in the middle. And and then of course all the students are bussed in for a half a day. We our program, we usually have between our 3 tracks, we have a commercial baking, a culinary, and a hospitality management track for the students. All have dual enrollment and national certification with ACF. So we try to not test the students until the end of the first year for ServSafe, and we are with special populations. We obviously limit the accommodation and that sort of thing. But what probably makes us most successful, and then now if you want to go to the next slide, we talk about some of the best practices that we've either kind of figured out the hard way or stolen from somebody else. As we all know, as educators, that's what we do. But one thing that we notice with a lot of teachers, especially statewide when we get together, is they were caught in the loop of, well, ServSafe is sanitation. I always teach sanitation in the first unit, so we're going to make them pass it before we get into cooking. What we found is that's a really difficult strategy, primarily because the students, this isn't just sanitation, this is managing sanitation, and there's a whole level of biology that goes with it. And
Right.
so we have about 40 programs that are housed on our campus, and we're lucky to have some biology and medical teachers as well. So a lot of times we can create cross-curricular collaboration. We can have those program specific or content specialists actually come in, we switch classes for the day, or they come in and help present in the same vein that they would do with their classes, especially when we're talking about the big 6 or some of the biological microorganisms. We also, because we test towards the end of the year, we tend to chunk it out a lot more. And so we really focus in on presenting something, and very similar to what Wayne demonstrated, which I've got some questions for you later on because it was great to see. But when we look at enrichments and we look at self-directed projects, that definitely, you can afford yourself, if the ServSafe idea becomes, instead of a unit, it's almost like a year-long journey parallel to everything else that they're using. And then we have a school-based enterprise. We have a student-run restaurant, we have a retail bakery, and then a banquet facility. So as the students are learning the concepts, they're actually practicing them. And for our hospitality management students especially, KP Learning is actually, the way we've integrated it with them is it becomes a companion tool. So it's we use it similar to how Wayne described, in that we look at their performance before we let them test, and we use that as kind of a predictor of how they'll do. And I won't let anyone move on to the test, as it were, until we get like a minimum 85% on 2 of the practice tests, as an example. But with what, it's basically right in line with Wayne. We want to see their performance on the KP platform first, before we actually give them what we call the live test. So
Awesome.
yeah.
Well, thank you, Joe, for that. And talk about diversity. You've definitely got a big cross section of people from all over the city, which is huge. Yeah. Arizona is like the 5th largest city. Phoenix is the 5th largest city in the nation. So,
Yeah.
So we definitely got a lot of people. All right, and let's move on to Joey. You have a very special circumstance with your students.
Yeah. So I'm gonna first give you kudos, Nye, for covering the entire demographic of student that uses KP between the 3 of us, because we have middle school, which I am just totally, Wayne, that's amazing. 8th graders, 6th, 7th, 8th graders, that's amazing. And Joe, your demographic is challenging. Mine is anybody over the age of 18 up to whatever age it may be. I actually have taught ServSafe and taken ServSafe in multiple facets throughout my career. We certified students at New England Culinary Institute for years, as all of you are aware, I'm sure. I was an instructor there for about 17 years or so, longer. But then I worked in admissions and recruitment. So Joe, I totally understand your program and being a regional technical center and the challenges that you have. And I visited many of them and have done Skills USA judging and have done all of those ProStart things and, you know, understand that demographic. Mine in particular is adults with challenges that could range from anything from being, now we're going to include COVID with that, being home isolated for a year and a half, or really it starts with maybe being jailed for 19 years for a misdemeanor crime or a felony crime that's nonviolent. It may be somebody with mental health issues that have been treated well and they are now ready to become workforce eligible. I have a very close collaboration and partnership between Vermont Food Bank and the Capstone Community Action Agency, which is a nonprofit organization that helps with housing, weatherization, you know, Head Start programs, and we have a food shelf. So the Vermont Food Bank and New England Culinary Institute about 10 years ago collaborated and created this program that's a hands-on teaching program that resources the food from the food bank that's donated to teach students basic culinary skills and give them workforce eligibility. So they don't have to leave my program and become chefs or use this as that. They can leave my program and continue their educations. They can leave my program and, you know, go be working in a dentist's office, but they may have addiction problems. They may have been in abusive marriages. They may have been in DCF custody their entire life and not able to make critical thinking decisions. And so it's quite amazing how my job now is really focused on social services, social enterprise, and teaching students to live well, again, and improving quality of life through a kitchen setting. So my students are quite different as far as technology goes, as far as the ability to have the technology to create a PowerPoint, or being in rural Vermont also, it can be a challenge, but we're working on getting the internet everywhere up here. What I want to say is, out of my classes, since I started 2 years ago at Community Kitchen Academy, the KP tool has been important to me. I wish I had it for my first group because I had the most students in that group, because that was the one before COVID. But now we have adjusted our curriculum to 5 sessions per year, 7-week sessions, and 5 students per session instead of 12 students, 3 sessions per year. So it's a small program. It's funded through Vermont Student Assistance Corporation. We have many community partners, such as Central Vermont Adult Basic Education and things like that. KP is really important to me in the process with adults who have not been in school for quite some time. And I actually have a person with Down syndrome that's one of my students for the first time ever, a challenge. He just took a KP practice exam yesterday and got a 95%. So I'm so excited because he really uses, I think, now all 3 of the formats you have there, the audio, the visual, and, you know, the hearing at the same time for somebody with his kind of disability. And he's high functioning, and he works in a cafe a couple of days a week and went through my class as a solo with his assistant for 4 weeks. I customized the program for him, and now he's in class 2 days a week with the other students. So I want to say that it really is a broad range for me. I start with the ServSafe actual food handlers book, and it's a very easy workbook, work from the book kind of way to introduce to students the information. And it's a lot of pictures and it's simple questions. And as you go through to the 5th chapter at the end, it becomes harder. So I find that that's a really easy way to just say, hey, this is what we're going to be working on. Go home and take the book with you and do the first 2 rounds and do the questions, and let's review those tomorrow. And that's what we do to get them back in. And then I take the KP and put that in between that study and the book study. And so once they start in KP&I, which can take my students a few days to actually, they'll log in, then they won't go, and then they do this, and then they do that, depending on what their life is doing. But then once they get going and they really utilize the KP curriculum, they do really well. It really depends on my student individually, how they utilize that program. And they're adults, right? So it's harder for me to get them to sit, study, do it. And like you, Wayne, my students have to pass this exam eventually. So they can take it twice with me. They can take it once and then one more time within the 6-week frame, or deadline of doing that. And they have to complete at least this exam and pass it within 6 months of completing their program with me. We only pay for it twice for them, and then they have to pay for it again, but they can come back and take it with me anytime. I've actually brought in a veteran NECI instructor to proctor the exam for me in person as well, because I'm the one who teaches their curriculum. I found better success with a different proctor, just because they can ask him questions, if they needed to, and it's a different face in the room, and it makes them feel, he's very academic, different than I am in that way. So he makes it feel like an exam situation, but not stressful. So it works.
Thanks, Joey.
Yeah.
You definitely have a great challenge group, because you're working with adults, so they have to have their own self-initiative to really want to do it. But you've done a wonderful thing to get them, to encourage them through the process and get them certified, which is a challenge, especially for
definitely.
So thank you three for this panel discussion. That concludes our discussion. But now with a presentation with each of you, but we're going to continue on, and each of you brought up different things that each other talked about. So let's go ahead and continue this talk, and talk about what you learned from Wayne, from Joey, from Joe, and just like let's just have a fireside chat. So